Welcome to the Tough Decisions Network. This is our special Sunday edition called Survive and Thrive with Dennae. Your host, Dennae Handford, will dive deep into chapter-by-chapter discussions on specifically selected books to help you make better decisions as an entrepreneur. Visit toughdecisions.net to sign up for our free weekly entrepreneur email. Before we get started, let's hear from one of our sponsors. Have you ever thought about investing in real estate, but find yourself so busy that you don't have time for it? Do you have FOMO, which is the fear of missing out? At HandfordCapital.com, we help investors with passive real estate investments that project better returns than traditional investment vehicles such as the stock market. If you'd like to find out more about our passive real estate investments, visit HandfordCapital.com. That's HANDFORD capital.com. We will jump on a call with you to discuss your investment goals and to see if our investments are a good fit for you. This advertisement is not to be construed as an offer or recommendation to buy or sell a security. Visit HandfordCapital.com.
Hello, and welcome to your Sunday edition of the Tough Decisions podcast. This is your host, Dennae, and I am excited to talk with you today about a new topic. We've spent the last several weeks talking about non-cognitive traits and talking about the things that separate those who succeed from those who don't succeed. The book specifically, as you recall, was about how children succeed and how we can develop those non-cognitive traits in our children and also children who may be struggling because they haven't developed those non-cognitive traits. But I think the value of the discussion was really very broad because there's so much we can learn and there's so much we can actually examine ourselves on as well. So I hope you enjoyed that. I know that was something that I really enjoyed and I found a lot of value in. But today I want to shift gears a little bit and go into a new topic. I have been reading a book called Talk Like TED, The 9 Public Speaking Secrets of the World's Top Minds. It's written by a man named Carmine Gallo, and I'm hoping to share with you today and over the next several weeks some of the most important ideas that he gives us in his book. Now, this topic of communication, public communication, is one that interests me and I find intriguing for a number of different reasons. First, just to be really honest with you, I don't think that public speaking is something that I'm extremely good at. I don't dislike it, and I'm no longer scared to do it, but it's not something that I've spent a lot of time perfecting. It's not a skill that I've spent a lot of time practicing. I have been a teacher before for about 6 years. I taught, and so I think I learned a lot about communication there. Specifically, if you've never had to give directions or instructions to junior high students or middle school students, you get really good at that really fast out of necessity. It's called survival. And if you want your classroom to have any sense of order whatsoever, then you learn really fast how to give instructions. And it's typically following 2 rules: slow and repeat yourself, and small, manageable chunks. Giving instructions to middle school students was not something that I was particularly good at when I first started, but I got better at it. Again, because of the need to survive. So there's things that I've improved and I feel more comfortable about, but public speaking was something that I feel like maybe was a little bit neglected in my educational experience, especially through high school. I got a lot more experience with it in college, but I think it was something that I could have had more experience and would have helped me if I had had more experience. And I think it's something that, if we're all honest, many of us don't enjoy public speaking. We don't enjoy public communication. But it's a really, really important and valuable skill, especially for entrepreneurs and for business owners, for business leaders, for any kind of leader, really. If you can't communicate and you can't communicate effectively, then you're really going to struggle to see your vision lived out and executed by those who are following you. Communication is so important. So I've been reading this book, Talk Like TED, and I want to jump into some of the main ideas. Today, I'm hoping to just really give a brief overview of the reasons behind the writing of this book. And then next week, we'll jump into the first of the 9 public speaking secrets. And I like the way it's very cleanly organized and basically Mr. Gallo takes one chapter to discuss each of what he identifies as a public speaking secret, and he discusses that thoroughly. I also appreciate the fact that he has watched countless hours of these TED Talks, as well as, he's done a lot of research himself as a coach. And so he identifies a lot of these secrets, if you will, from personal experience, but then he's also gone and found the scientific research that backs up the reasons why these tips or these keys to public speaking are so important, the reason why they work and why we need to be aware of them when we're preparing any kind of public communication. So I appreciate that about him as well. Now, when we first jump in, I just want to give you a little bit of background about the TED Talks, because I found this interesting because these were things I didn't know. I may be behind times a little bit here, but I just became aware of the whole TED Talk phenomenon, if you will, recently. And by recently, I don't mean like last week, but, in the last several years, I became aware of the TED Talks. And I've watched a number of them online, and I really enjoy a lot of those presentations. But TED Talks were actually organized, this whole conference, the TED conference, was actually organized back in the 1980s by a man named Richard Saul Wurman. And it began as a once-a-year event, 4 days. There were 50 speakers, and each speaker was given 18 minutes. So they had an 18-minute presentation. And that continued up until 2005, when a man named Chris Anderson purchased the rights to the conference, and he began growing and expanding it. It became an international event called TED Global. They had the one in the U.S., which was the original TED conference, and then they scheduled another one called TED Global, which was an international audience. And then they began to organize third-party TED conferences, and these were called TEDx events, and you can see a number of those online, primarily on Facebook is where I've seen those. So anybody now can organize their own TED conference in their local community. And all of that expansion kind of began in 2005, shortly thereafter. In 2006, we had TED.com that was launched. And so now you can go online and you can watch, many, many, many TED Talks online. And I actually went and did a little bit of research myself and found the first 6 TED Talks that were ever posted online in 2006. You'll probably recognize a lot of these. Al Gore on the climate crisis, his was posted in 2006. Hans Rosling posted there. He did a 19-minute presentation with statistics on the developing world. And the thing I found interesting about his presentation was he spent 19 minutes talking about primarily statistics, but I would dare you to find someone who was as excited about statistics as this individual. I mean, it's compelling viewing. It really is. Tony Robbins was one of the first 6. Majora Carter, Ken Robinson, and David Pogue were also among the first 6 TED Talks that were posted online. And so these obviously have been viewed a number of times, and you can go online and see yourself. The TED Talk has become sort of one of those outlets that, a celebrity or anyone with any kind of influence who wants to take on a cause, many times they head straight for the TED conference and get a spot there, and they give their cause in 18 minutes. And because of that, you have a number of people that, have been able to present their cause or present their arguments or their point of view in a very powerful way. And so this book then seeks to figure out exactly what makes these TED Talks so powerful and so compelling and so influential. Now, the author, Carmine Gallo, had previously written a book called The Presentation Secrets of Steve Jobs. And so he draws from some of those ideas that he presents in that book. And then he also, of course, has, as I mentioned earlier, watched countless hours of these TED Talks. And he sees a lot of similarities. So he says, Steve Jobs, even though he doesn't have a TED Talk, he himself found a lot of similarities between those presentation secrets that he had originally written about of Steve Jobs and also what makes these TED Talk presenters so powerful. Another interesting thing that I think, and I already mentioned this just a moment earlier, was that he doesn't just pick out what he sees as being the 9 most important aspects of these TED Talks, but he also has done the research and presented the science behind these communication techniques. And I think that's important because it's not just someone, even though he is highly qualified to do it, it's not just one person's going, this is what I think are the 9 most important techniques used in these TED Talks, but there's actually science. And we have the benefit now of that science. He mentions The Art of Public Speaking, which was written by Dale Carnegie in the early 1900s. And Carnegie was a little bit, I think, before his time, but he recommended that speakers keep their talks short. He recommended that the speakers use stories because that was a powerful way of connecting with the audience. He suggested the use of rhetorical devices such as metaphors and analogies. And even before such things as PowerPoint, Carnegie was recommending that speakers use visual aids. So in many ways, he was ahead of his time. He realized the importance of the things that get attention and provide a strong delivery. But Carnegie didn't have the benefit of the functional MRI, which we do today. And that's what Gallo has called upon, the research that can be done through the fMRI that actually can scan people's brains to see exactly what areas are being activated when they're performing a certain task, such as speaking or listening to someone else. So with those advantages now today, we can actually see what's going on and how the brain is responding to certain rhetorical devices, to storytelling, to the passionate presentation that they are listening to. And so while Carnegie had the right idea, he didn't have the tools that we have today to actually understand the science behind it. Now, Gallo says that there are 3 components of an inspiring presentation, and that's how he's divided his book up into 3 different sections. He says that the most compelling presentations are, first of all, emotional, they are novel, and they are memorable. So they're emotional in that they touch our heart or they touch our emotions. They are novel in that they teach us something new that we did not previously know. And they are memorable in that they present content in ways that we will not soon forget. So those are the 3 components of an inspiring presentation according to Gallo and his research. And that's how he divided his book up. So next week, we're going to jump into that first component, which is that of emotion, and talk about how we can present an emotional presentation. Now, just to clarify, we'll get into this more next week, but when we say emotional presentation, of course, we're not talking about always, shedding lots of tears, but it's a presentation that touches our heart. It's presented with passion. These presentations produce an emotional response in the audience, and that's at least part of what makes them effective in accomplishing whatever the purpose is for their being given. Now, I want to leave you with one thought before we close and wrap it up for today. Tony Robbins, whose talk was one of the original 6 TED Talks that was posted online, said that effective leaders have the ability to move themselves and others to action because they understand the invisible forces that shape us. And if we don't get anything else from these discussions on communication, I hope that we will come to the point where we realize that communication, effective communication, can be one of those invisible forces that shapes the world around us. The ability to communicate effectively is so important. And as leaders of our businesses, as leaders of our social circles, as leaders in our homes, we have to be able to effectively communicate the things that are important to us, the things that we value. Otherwise, no one else is going to be able to value and appreciate and understand those things unless we can communicate them to them. So understanding the invisible force of communication and using that to influence those around us is so important. We'll talk specifically next week about passion and how passion can shape our communication.
Thank you for listening to the Tough Decisions Network. Be sure to visit toughdecisions.net to gain access to show notes for this episode and to join our free weekly entrepreneur email where we will send you news about the latest technology for your business inspiring quotes, and the latest books for entrepreneurs. That's toughdecisions.net.